film audience. I'm Edith Solitan for the Jewish Historical Society of the Metro West, and I'm interviewing and talking to Mrs. Frieda G, who came to this country from Hungary many, many years ago, too long to tell. Tell us something that was important in your life as you were growing up.
Growing up.
Well, you said...
I like to tell you about when I was born. I was interested.
Well, then that's growing up.
My parents were married about 6 years before they had a first child. They were very disappointed that they hadn't her there because all the girls and boys in their community, that got married at that time, were breeding well and were having many children. And my parents had nothing. And then my mother became pregnant. And my father was filled with great joy. He went out and bought 40 geese to stuff, feed them and stuff them so they'd be nice and fat by the time his son would be born. He was sure it was going to be a boy, and it was. Then a few years went by, and they had no children any further, and my mother became pregnant again. I think about 4 or 5 years. And it was Pesach, and she was in great distress. And the doctor came in to see her, and after he interviewed her, he said to her she'll give birth in about 2 weeks. He says, I can't wait 2 weeks. I have to give birth now. I can't stand it any longer. And he said, I'm sorry, when I come back from a trip, I'll be back in 2 weeks, and I'll help you in your birth. And he left, and the midwife left, and my mother's sister left. And the only 2 people left in the house were my grandfather and my father. And they were very distressed to find my mother was in such terrible agony. So my grandfather said to my mother, let's walk her around the table 9 times. She'll give birth then. So they both took her under the arm, each under one arm, and they walked around the table 9 times, and she sat down on the bed and gave birth to a boy. My father saw it was a boy. He was filled with delight, and he dashed out of the house and went down to the train station and caught the doctor before he was able to get on board the train and to bring him back. Then he ran for the midwife. Then he ran for his sister-in-law, and then he went to shul. And he made a big announcement. My wife gave birth to a boy, and we're having a bris on Achel Pesach. That means the last day of Pesach. And he was so delighted that he was able to produce another child. And it just happens that I was born 2.5 hours later. The boy was born before Mincha, and I was born after Myra. Had my mother had 2 boys, we would have had 2 separate brisses. But as it was, I saved them the expense. Now, on the first day Pesach, at the nighttime, after Mincha, after Myra, they're supposed to count the Svira. And you have to wait until the stars come out. So it took many hours before the stars came out, and when he came home, he approached my mother and he said, well, how are you? And I was a little boy. She said, a little boy? There's a little girl. He says, I saw a boy. She says, there's a boy, but there's a girl. He thought that she was distressed because she was so mixed up because she was in such distress and suffered so much agony that she didn't know what she was talking about. So he said, you told me that it was a girl, and I saw it was a boy. He said, yes, there's a boy, there's a girl, there's a boy, there's a girl. And he looked at her and he couldn't understand what she was talking about because he couldn't understand how he could produce a twin. And she took the covers aside and she showed him she had 2 babies there. He took one look, walked out of the room and fell to a dead faint.
That's a very funny story, and it does show you the customs that went on in Jewish homes even then, the superstitions about walking her around 9 times.
Yeah.
There must have been a reason for it. Tell us about, you seem to think that your mother's illness at one point was important to your life. Can we hear about that?
Oh, that was, my mother had a lot of stress because of my sister-in-law. And she came home from a visit, and she became very confused, and she lost her sight perception, her light perception. She couldn't see things. She thought she saw shadows, but she couldn't see. I showed her my two fingers, and she didn't know what it was. She thought it was a cigar. And she just couldn't see. I had a few doctors come in to see her then. I had a ophthalmologist come in.
How old were you at the time?
I was a young lady. I had just been married a short time with my first husband. And so it took some time till she got better, but she never told me. She forgot how to read because she was ashamed to show that she had any ignorance. You know, she was a very mature and a well-versed woman. So that year, after she had recovered, we sent her to Florida for the winter. And there, she had new stress. There was, at that time, there were no airplanes. It was the wartime, World War II. And she was told by all the other guests at the hotel that she was staying at that if she didn't have a reservation to return to New York, she'll have to stay there for good, because you can't get on the trains. There were people that were buying up all the tickets on the trains, and they were selling them for costly prices. And she was afraid she wouldn't be coming back. Now it just happened that I decided that I was going to Florida and I was going to pick her up. I'll stay there for the holiday and I'll pick her up and take her home with me. When I arrived there, I had written to her, but she hadn't read my letters. I didn't know until after she died that she never read my letters. Because I call her in between, I get all the information from her. So I came there and I presented myself before her. She said, "How'd you ever get here?" She was so shocked and surprised and delighted. And I stayed with her at that hotel. She said, "But you must be able to get a reservation back. If you don't get a reservation back, we won't be able to go to New York." I said, "Don't worry, I'll find a reservation for you. Just leave everything to me." And she trusted me. But one day I went to Miami City. I went down to the train station, and I said, "I want a ticket to New York. I want a Pullman." And they gave me a berth, a lower berth for the two of us, because the train was expected to be crowded. And I came back to the hotel. She was delighted we were going back home. She didn't care when, as long as we were going back home. Well, she was very agitated the day we left. And we got on the train, and I quieted her down, and she was feeling better. And that evening, they made our berth, and we went to sleep. What happened was that during the night, she wakened me, and she said, "Frieda, I think I'm getting a heart attack." And I became very alarmed. So I remembered one doctor had told me, if she feels that she's getting agitated and feeling a heart attack, take a wet towel and put it on her chest. So I crept out of the berth in my nightgown. I ran to the ladies' room. I took a very cold towel, and I was very sleepy at the time. I started walking back to my berth, and I opened the curtain, and I put the towel on what I thought was her chest, and my hand was grabbed. And the man said, "She's trying to rob me. She wants to kill me." Because when you feel something cold during the night while you're sleeping, it feels like a stabbing wound or a knife or something like that. And it was a man who grabbed my wrist. I had gone to the workplace. And
Did you find your mother?
my mother was in the next berth. And what happened was that he started holding, he called for the security. And they came dashing down, and everybody put their heads out the curtain to see what was happening down below. And there were only about six berths there, and then the uppers. And everybody was wondering what was happening. Nobody said a word. And I kept on saying, let me go, let me go. And he refused to let me go. I said, my mother's having a heart attack. He said, no, you were trying to rob me. And when security came, they tried to release me, and he wouldn't let go because he said I was trying to rob him. So I said to the security, listen, my mother's in the next berth, she's having a heart attack. He says, where is she? And my mother was standing right there. And she said, here I am. I thought it was so funny, so did everybody else.
It really is. That's a very nice story. And you saved your mother's life, we hope.
She was so concerned about her child that she forgot she was having a heart attack.
Okay. Well, these are the little stories that we like to have in our archives because it tells about your before birth and during birth and growing up. So we thank you very, very much for being here. We
You're welcome.
appreciate the stories that you've told us. And if ever you would
Did
like
it take
to...
5 minutes?
Oh, I think so.
Closer to 10.
Yeah. It was long. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
I mean, I hope they were interesting for you.
I think they were. I think they were.
Yes.
And we'll put them in our archives with the other Solitan interviewing Susan Marks at the Jewish Community Center in Whippany. The interview is part of the Project for Jewish Historical Society of Metro West. Susan has an interesting story to tell us because she was born in Newark.
And grew up in West Orange, New Jersey, and eventually wound up in Israel, but let me backtrack. Actually, let me begin with Israel itself. I've always had a love for Jewish history. While I was in Israel, I did the photos research illustrating the Encyclopedia Judaica.
When was the
Spurned by-
first time you went to Israel?
If I may continue this for a moment, because it
Okay.
will lead me back. It was a wonderful experience, and I think one of the most interesting things about being hired for that job was when I went for the job interview, they couldn't believe that a nice Jewish girl from Essex County, New Jersey, could actually possibly go through an interview asking all of the Judaic questions that they had for me. I passed it with flying colors, and I was employed with a lot of other Americans, but also with many Israelis. But I remember that interview till this day, and I can relate it back to my growing up in Essex County and the conservative religious education that I had. As I said, I was born in Newark. First grade, family moved up to West Orange, but I can still remember going to my first services in an old shul on High Street in Orange, which does not exist today, and I can never get anyone to remember it, but I know that I was there. From there, I had my education at Beth Torah. I was in their early Hebrew school classes. When the whole world moved over to Ohev Sholem, I went over to Ohev Sholem, grew up in their congregation under the late Rabbi Levitsky, now the late Dr. Shapiro, and now Rabbi Truster. But while I was going through school, I got involved with Young Judea. And I think I sort of owe my life, I owe my life, my philosophy, the way I live, the way I think, and the way I breathe to Young Judea itself. And what's very interesting was Rabbi Barry Friedman, as I often call it, Barry Friedman's shul. He was my mirakez, my counselor at camp. He sort of influenced me.
He was from B'nai Abraham.
Well, he's now from B'nai Abraham. Going through high school, West Orange High School, we had a project known as Senior Hours in which we had to donate time to an organization. While I was in Young Judaism movement, I donated my time that way too. And just through him, his words, he sent me on to Israel. I fell in love with the country. Fell minorly in love with the kibbutznik, but came back, had my senses about me, came back to school. 4 years at Boston University. But to my parents' chagrin, 10 days after graduation, was on a boat with all my worldly possessions, and I moved to Jerusalem, found this job, and set up an absolutely wonderful life. But again, I say, I relate it back to what I grew up with around here. But what my parents taught me, but also with what the community taught me.
Tell me about Young Judea when you first joined.
When I
How
first joined
big,
it as a
how-
movement, we were relatively small as a movement. We were competing a lot with USY. And what I liked about Young Judea, and what I think is great about Young Judea, is the fact that it's a movement without a specific religious identity. Through Young Judea, I learned to have many strictly Orthodox friends, many non-believing friends. Oh, not non-believing, but I think you sort of know what I mean. And to accept all strands of Judaism, that we are one of the people, we're one people. I think Young Judea is great.
And you think Young Judea set these standards in your mind?
Most definitely.
Was it a large group of, and where did
Young
you meet?
Judea was
Where did you meet?
We used to meet in, well, this was in high school. We used to meet in various people's homes in the evening. And what's interesting today, I look at myself now, I can't believe it, approaching soon age 50, that's hard to believe, I can't be half a century old. But looking back, the friends that I have in time are people that I met through the movement and through the Young Judea camps. Also, yes, not only was I a camper, I was also an arts and crafts counselor and a regular camp counselor. Young Judea was good. Or Jewish education, Jewish camping, instilling Jewishness in you is something that lasts a whole lifetime. And in today's, as I was saying, today I can relate back to that. In the job that I chose, also in the job that I chose when I came back to the States.
Is it a thriving organization
Today?
now?
Unfortunately not.
How long ago did it almost disappear?
Well, it's
And what do you think caused it?
I don't know. But I really do not have enough knowledge to know really the concerns of it today. I have no children, so therefore I really can't follow it. I go to alumni meetings, but I really don't know the cause for its demise, but it's a shame. It would be nice if it existed. It would be nice if there were such an environment for children today, because I wish, when I look at the world around me, I wish it had the great things that I was able to grow up with, which I do not see as existing.
And you got all of that
A
from
lot
Young
of it.
Judea?
And also,
much
of course, much of it. And also from my parents and from the fact that I was always curious as to my Judaism and always research. For example, I'm an avid traveler. Whenever I go anyplace, the first thing I will look for is a Jewish site, my Jewish roots. Roots to me are important. In Rhodes, I'm part of the tour of the Greek Isles. I stop off, I leave the group, I find a Jewish site. I find the old Jewish quarter, and I'll photograph it. Again, this is my experience on working on the encyclopedia, perhaps. Roots are important, roots are strong. People should know their roots and appreciate them.
You worked on the Encyclopedia of Jerusalem?
It's called the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's a 15-volume Jewish encyclopedia that was edited by the late British professor Cecil Roth. It's Jewish history in 15 volumes.
And you were part of that?
Yes, they're doing the photo research on it.
Well, I wish you much success in any future endeavors you do, because that certainly
Thank you
is
very
a
much.
very, very important contribution. And thank you so much for giving us this interview.
Okay, this is Dr. Joseph Brandeis.
Brandeis, like Brandeis without the I.
And he's here to help us get our interviews correlated, and he's going to talk about his father. And your father's name was?
My father's name was Harry Oliver Shalom, Hersh in Yiddish,
Uh-huh.
and Tzvi ben Avram Abba in Hebrew.
Okay. And when did he come to this country? Tell me the story.
Yeah, my father came here in 1928, which was the year that I was born. And when my father had to leave Poland because of economic pressures, he had planned to come to America for some time. He had an uncle in Canada who managed to bring him over actually as a bachelor. Because of that, my father left before I was born. And
He left for where?
he left first to Canada, and then managed to come over to the United States. He had a very difficult time in Canada because he had no money, he had no trade, he had no profession, he didn't know the language. And consequently, he thought maybe things would be better in the United States, which they really weren't, because there was a severe depression then too in the 1930s. So things were pretty bad in the United States as well. And it was my mother who took care of myself and my two sisters. And after many years of hardship in the United States and all kinds of legal complications, my father was able to bring us over to America in March of 1939, a few years before the beginning of World War II.
Okay, he brought you from where? From Poland?
We came from Poland. We're Galicianers. I was born in a little town called Trembowla, which was my father's hometown. But when my father left, my mother felt she'd have a better time with her mother's family and with her brothers. So we moved to a nearby town, which was Buchach. It's the same town that Agnon comes from, by the way. But it was only after I became a parent myself and now a grandfather too, that I realized what unusual circumstances these were, that I didn't meet my father until the age of 11. And supposedly the standing joke in my family was that when we were on board the ship, the Queen Mary, I was the first one supposedly who recognized my father from the ship. My father was waiting for us on the dock there. And supposedly I said, "Oh, there's our daddy, there's our daddy." I said it in Polish to my mother and to my sisters. And also another anecdote in my family is that when one of my father's friends visited us in Poland, I think with some letters from my father and some gifts and I think probably some financial assistance, I turned to my two sisters and not having ever seen my father, I said, maybe at the age of 5 or 6, I said, "Oh, look, girls, there's some kind of father here from America." As this was a male figure, and I said, "There's some kind of father." Yeah, I was surrounded by females, my two grandmothers and my two sisters, and my mother, of course, Alea Shalom. But also I had some male role models and my mother's 3 brothers who lived nearby, and actually one of them was a bachelor, so he lived in the same house with my grandmother. So I had some male role models, as well as some fine female family people, of course. And then the strange part of it was when I met my father, we had no problems getting together. We were on very friendly terms right off the bat. We clicked almost immediately. It's as if there was something, as if we had been waiting for 11 years to meet each other, and then finally we met, and it was perfectly normal. My father was very enthusiastic, and I was a very skinny kid at the time, unlike the way I look now. But my father tried to build me up, and consequently I remember he used to feed me malted milks in the local store and all kinds of things, milkshakes and egg creams in the Bronx and all kinds of things to make sure that I grew up stronger and that I built some body fat on me. Also, my father was a seltzer man, and as soon as I could, as a teenager, I worked with him on the seltzer truck.
Delivering seltzer?
Pardon?
Delivering seltzer?
Yes, delivering seltzer to private homes. So this was one way I got to know the Bronx better, because I know Mondays my father would go to the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx, and Tuesdays it would be the West Bronx, and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday would be another part of the Bronx. And I got to meet different people in different neighborhoods. Mostly our clientele was Jewish, except for the Pelham Bay Park area, where we brought seltzer and beer and soda to Italian American families who lived in 2-family homes or 1-family homes.
Was that his truck? Was that his
He
truck?
owned his truck, and that's how he managed to work his way up and support himself. As a matter of fact, originally he had a horse-driven carriage, and then eventually worked his way up to a truck, and it was because of the money that he was able to save from the seltzer business, he was able to bring us over to the United States.
Okay, where did you go? I mean, where did you live? And what kind of a...
Well, we lived on a 4th floor walk-up in the Bronx, which I thought was very nice.
was
Today,
it cold water? Or was it a cold
No,
water
no,
tap?
it was hot and cold running water, and my father, with the help of a cousin, was able to get the apartment furnished, so it was pretty comfortable. And we lived right across the street from a synagogue. There were some trees, a little plot of land with some trees across the way from the building. I used to like to sit by the window and read and look out at the trees, and I was very happy in the Bronx. Today they call it Fort Apache. It's it's the southeast Bronx, one of the worst areas, ostensibly in the United States. But I learned a great deal by being with my father in the seltzer business about being self-reliant and the value of hard work, including physical work, and seeing all the people who were our customers. We usually had a black person working alongside with us, so the three of us would sit in this cab of the truck together. We always got along very well, and pretty much all three of us did the same work, except my father drove the truck, but he also carried seltzer boxes, and I carried seltzer boxes up 2 flights of stairs, 3 flights of stairs. Box weighed maybe 55 pounds, so it was very heavy work. And in the summertime, it was extremely hot. Naturally, the cab of the truck was not air conditioned. I remember one day in the summer, my father and I drank 8 bottles of milk between the two of us. We had plenty of water on the truck, but it was too warm to drink, so we'd have to go to a candy store or a grocery store to pick up something to drink. It was hard work. I remember a couple of incidents that stand out that are an interesting commentary on the lives of immigrants and the way they were accepted. I still remember to this day how I was hurt when one of my father's customers, who was sort of yelling out the window, and she was supposedly more Americanized than my father, she yelled out an order as to how much she wanted seltzer. And I think at one point she corrected my father. He said, how much do you want? And she said, you're not supposed to say how much, you're supposed to say how many, because they're bottles in the seltzer box. So I still remember it to this day as a kind of pedantic comment correcting my father. And another little anecdote, I knew when World War II was over, not by hearing it on the radio or reading it in the papers, but hearing it from our customers, who were buzzing around back and forth, and some of them didn't speak English very well. And I remember to this day how they said the war was over, and we would say, how do you know? And the lady would say, it's official. And that's how they pronounce official. It's official. So to this day, I remember this English word official, which of course means a fish.
It's a little
But
bit.
this is official, not to worry, the war was over.
Okay. Was it difficult for you to sort of get acclimated or get orientated into the American kind of life after what the kind of life that you led?
Well, I was very much a little Polish patriot when I came here, and as a matter of fact, I remember to this day how resentful I was when the Polish authorities made me promise that when I left Poland I would never come back. I was a kid of 11 who was very patriotic, and I wore one of those Pilsudski caps in school, modeled after the kind of cap that the Polish dictator wore, Pilsudski, who was, by the way, fairly benevolent to the Jewish people, much more so than some of his successors. But I don't recall having any particular problems learning English or getting acclimated to the school. I started first grade when I was 11. I was just put into first grade because I didn't know any English. But pretty soon I was promoted to third grade and fourth grade and whatever I should have been by age 11. My sisters had studied some English, but they were older than I was, and they had an English tutor coming at home. But I knew hardly any English. On the other hand, I picked it up very readily, partly because I was only 11, and my father didn't want us to speak Polish, so that I don't recall having particular problems. I read voraciously. I read American history books and novels, and particularly I liked historical novels, which something that got me involved in history, and I've been involved in history professionally. I teach at William Paterson College.
That's interesting. So that your early education really formulated what the kind of ambitions that you had for later life.
Yes, to some extent. I think I was influenced by that. My mother always read stories to us in German or in Polish or occasionally in Yiddish, and I was always fascinated by stories, and particularly by history. I remembered as a kid in Poland and even in the United States how I dreamed of living in the age of Napoleon. I wondered what it must have been like to live in such dramatic times, and to get the flavor of the times. Little did I realize that we would live through more dramatic and unfortunately much more tragic events in World War II and the Holocaust era.
What year was it that you came to this country?
My mother, my two sisters, and I came here in 1939 in March.
So it was right before.
Just before World War II, yes.
And were you intimidated, or were you a part of the discrimination that they had against the Jews when you were in Poland?
Well, I only heard stories about discrimination. Occasionally, I think I was sort of threatened physically by youngsters in school, and I have very vague memories of a school that was kind of run down, but I was sick much of the time. I was a sickly kid, so I didn't go to school that much, public school in Poland. I did get some private tutoring in Jewish subjects and secular subjects.
Was
at
that
home.
because your mother or your mother's family felt that it was better for you to be out of that kind of environment at the school, so that you were sad to be sick, or was it because you really were sick that you?
I really was sick. I don't know exactly why, but I improved greatly once I came to America, and I didn't really have any serious problems, but I was, at least so I hear from anecdotes in my family, that I was a kind of sickly child and kind of trouble to the family, especially when I was quite young. But I really don't remember too much about attending public school in Poland, and of course I heard stories about Jewish people being beaten up, and I remember hearing stories about the Jews who were expelled from Germany in 1938 and 1939. But it all seemed very distant to me as a child, and somewhat similarly during the World War II years, I read in the Yiddish papers and the English press, English language press, about persecution of Jewish people in Europe. But I never really felt any of the hardships of anything like concentration camp or what have you.
Yeah, that was good.
Later on, I married a young woman who was from Germany and who came here also in 1939.
So she escaped it too.
Kid her about how come I didn't see her on the boat. Yes, she came here with her father and mother and her two brothers from Germany, and we married in 1953, and since then we have 4 daughters and 4 grandchildren, thank God. So
Oh, that's very nice.
we're very happy.
No sons.
We had no sons, but I have 2 grandsons and 2 granddaughters,
Okay,
so I think I have no
that's fine.
complaints at all on any score.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you, being here.